Thank you for downloading this RealAgriculture podcast. Excite your crops with inputs from Excite Bio. Access nitrogen and phosphorus with Excite Bio's lineup of inoculants and ag biologicals. Since 2010, they've been helping farmers harness the power of the soil. Learn more at excitebio.ca. That's XITEBIO.ca.
I'm Sean Haney, and this is Real Ag on the Weekend. Let's get real and get connected with the week that was in Canadian agriculture. Real Ag on the Weekend starts now.
Hello and welcome to Real Ag on the Weekend here on CJME 980 and CKOM 650. I am your host for the day, Lyndsey Smith, and I am super pleased to be here. Sean Haney, your regular host, has had just an absolute whirlwind of a week. He was in Louisville at the National Farm Machinery Show. He covered Canada's Ag Day in Ottawa, and then he was out in Alberta covering some things there as well. And so I get to be your host this weekend. And so thanks for joining me here. As always, of course, you can hear this show, back episodes of the show, and anything else we've got over at RealAgriculture.com. You can download all our podcasts from there. Now, for this week's show, we've got some really fantastic coverage of Canada's Ag Day, as I mentioned. So Tuesday in Ottawa, in the nation's capital, there was the Future of Food event. And Sean got, 5 or 6 different interviews from there, and I've pulled a couple of them for today's show. Just snippets of what was said. Definitely a huge focus on the potential that Canada has, that Canadian agriculture has, not just here at home, but for the world. But it wasn't all sunshine and roses, and I'm going to pull a bit of that audio from Murad Al-Katib. He's, of course, the president and CEO of AGT Food and Ingredients out of Regina, and he had some tough love that he metered out for the crowd about, just what Canada has to do to actually be a leader in the global food space. But, of course, before we get to that, we do have Ann Wasko of East End, Saskatchewan. She's going to join us for the beef market update here right away. And then for the tail end of the show, we've got Drew Lerner with his spring forecast. So Kelvin Hepner was in Winnipeg, Manitoba. He was at Crop Connect this week. I mean, what better way to spend Valentine's Day? Anyway, he was in Winnipeg this week and spoke with Drew about whether or not we're going to see any sort of substantial return to moisture for the prairies and for Saskatchewan, of course. So we'll hear that near the end. As always, as we get rolling on today's show, if you've got feedback, you can call that feedback line 1-855-776-6147. Leave us a message if you've got ideas of what you'd like to see covered on the show, or want, to have your say on anything we cover. Would love to hear from you there. And of course, you can follow us on social media at Real Agriculture. Really, just about any platform. You'll find us there. Just plunk us in the search bar, and there we are. Okay, without further ado, let's hop to my conversation with Ann Wasko with this week's Beef Market Update. So joining me, of course, is Ann Wasko of the Gateway Livestock Exchange. How are you, Ann?
I am great. Good to be with you, Lyndsey.
Yeah, I know. Thank you, Sean. Okay. He's busy, so we get to do this, and I don't mind. I really don't. It's a lot of fun.
This is good.
Yeah, it is. Okay, so let's catch up. What did the numbers do over the past few weeks?
Well, I'm going to call this week's market in the U.S. a little bit of a breather market. We've had such a good run in prices through January and early this month. But this week we took a bit of a breather. So in the South, Texas, Kansas, markets were off $2. We'll call it 180 live. In the North, 179 to 180. So that's 1 to 2 lower. And if you're looking at the dressed market in Nebraska, 287 delivered, which is also a couple bucks lower. So a big run. Markets need to take breathers as they're moving, and I would call that one of these weeks. The cutout, that choice cutout, the wholesale price that we watch, at the end of the day, last night's cutout at $2.95 for the choice was the same as a week ago, but it's kind of been down and then up and then down. So it's funny, over a week, a lot can happen, but here we are 7 days later, and it's the same as a week ago. The next month, if you're looking at wholesale prices, it's not usually the time for beef to really shine, if you will. So I expect that market to continue to be pretty choppy until we get truly into that grilling season. And on the price side, just to bring it back to Western Canada, cash cattle picked up a little bit, 370 delivered dressed, up a couple of bucks from last week is what Canfax reported, and a few live sales at 219 FOB the feedlot. So, you know, a little bit better on the local market, but again, it has not gained the ground that the U.S. saw through January. So that's good to see. Mm-hmm. And I'd mentioned to you earlier, Lyndsey, I wanted to do just a little bit of a update on where we are with slaughter rates, just into, so what are we, 5-6 weeks into the year. And fed cattle slaughter so far in 2024 in Canada is, so this is steers and heifers, down 2% versus last year. And cow slaughter is down 12%. So that's interesting because we did see, an increase, a bump in cow kill through 2023, but it's certainly starting off at a slower pace here in 24. Now, one can point to the weather. It was a very cold January, likely had quite a bit to do with it, but nevertheless, we're sitting down 12%. And to round out that slaughter production kind of data numbers that I like to talk about, steer carcass weights last week, still pretty big, 983 pounds. If you look at for those 7-8 weeks of the month of the year so far, we're still running up 43 pounds from a year ago. So we've got a big reflection on what happened last fall, just with how good the weather was for feeding cattle in Western Canada. And that is, and again, placing cattle, feeding them longer, they're in the yard longer, and so obviously we're looking at heavier carcass weight. So that's what's happened here.
That is a big number, absolutely. Now the drop, the 2% down on slaughter and 12% on cow slaughter, definitely starting off slower. Where is that in relation to, say, 5-year average? Do you have that number? Is that more in line with what we typically see this time of year?
It would be more in line. You're right, because we're looking at some COVID years in there and whatnot. So in terms of January, we were still looking at a small number. Just, again, I'm going to lean on that weather as a key factor as to why, even versus some of the previous years before that without COVID and some of the other bumps along the way, that we were looking at a small start to 2024 in terms of harvest rates.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but that in conjunction with heavier carcass weights doesn't necessarily bode well. We need to keep rolling here. Although, as you mentioned, milder weather the first half of the winter can, of course, mean easier gain. So that, of course, has to play itself out as well in the market. Now, we do have some cattle on feed reports coming. What's the expectation there?
Yeah, so the Alberta Saskatchewan report for February 1st will come out later today. And my expectation is that we'll see that January placement number considerably smaller, again, due to the weather that we had in Western Canada and the smaller auction market volume. So certainly that was the key factor. But, I think this is going to be a trend as we go through the year simply because we have smaller cattle numbers, right? So at the end of the day, somewhere along the line, there's going to be fewer cattle placed on feed. And I think that's what we're going to start to see. And same with that's going to bring our on-feed numbers down. If you're placing fewer, you're going to have a smaller on-feed population. And as we go down the road in 2024, we'll see smaller numbers as well. Now in the U.S., there reports another week away, but early expectations are also for the January placements in the U.S. to be down 15 or 16%, so a pretty big drop. And again, that should bring that on-feed number. If you recall, January on-feed numbers were still above a year ago. I think even by the time we get to February 1, we're going to see those on-feed inventory numbers dropping below a year ago in both countries.
So now I want to pull it back to that point about the lower cattle numbers and, Canada and the U.S. similarities in pulling back of that cow herd year over year and year over year and year over year. Realistically, there are some signals. If you've got moisture, if you've got some feed, prices have been strong. The signal is to hold back heifers. But we're hearing from some that they're just not sure that is the right move. What has to sort of line up in a crystal ball to actually rebuild a cow herd?
Well, historically, and those comments are bang on from folks that are kind of relaying that back to you. Historically, the two key drivers are Mother Nature, moisture, and profitability. And so those two things have certainly turned, or well, the one thing has certainly turned in the favor of profitability. And depending where you live, the moisture piece has also improved. So for those folks, they're certainly looking at, okay, costs are up, obviously across the board, whether you're a cattle producer or a crop producer, you're looking at higher costs, and those aren't necessarily going away. And from a cow-calf perspective, there's really no one else to pass it along to. So there has to be some confidence that those higher cattle prices that we're seeing are going to last for some time. And I think I think that'll just, as time moves on and we see this market continue to stay strong in 24, 5, maybe even longer, that confidence is there. So I know everybody's going to be in a different boat in terms of, how they view that, where their position is in terms of making that step for restocking or rebuilding or retaining heifers, however you want to look at it. But I think the pieces are certainly there, as long as, especially those areas that still need the moisture, they still need to see it. But that confidence piece, because costs are so high, we need to feel confident. So does that just take some time to prove it through? I can't predict that one, Lyndsey, but that I think is a missing piece for sure, that confidence piece.
Well, and we certainly haven't seen necessarily widespread return of moisture either. I mean, we are talking about some areas with an improvement, but not necessarily widespread. And as you mentioned, it's that improvement over time for both the profitability piece and the moisture piece that are really going to take the difference. That being said, of course, we know we can't just create heifers overnight either. So the cattle industry is definitely, it's a long game. It's not a short-term one.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
Exactly.
All right.
So it will take some time on both directions. So yeah, it'll be it's going to be a fun year. Let's put it that way.
Well, let's hope moisture returns to the west where everybody needs it, and soon it will be a discussion of where you put all this hay. Let's try that one on for size. Okay, Ann Wasko, thank you so much for joining me on the Beef Market Update this week.
Okay, thanks. Talk soon, Lyndsey.
All right, let's hop to a quick break, and I'll be back with Kelvin Hepner's discussion with Drew Lerner right after this.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
There's a reason we call it the Corn School. Videos on everything from planter setup to weed control, field trial results, and the latest yield strategies. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF. Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from RealAgriculture.com, or as a podcast in your favorite podcast app. Check out the latest Corn School episode today.
Welcome back to RealAg on the weekend here for February 17th. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith. Thanks for listening here on CJME 980 and CKOM 650. This segment is brought to you by Co-op. Co-op knows your community because we live here too. Our teams are your trusted partners with a range of expertise to help support your entire farm operation. Co-op, here for your farm, here for your family. Learn more at coop.crs/farm. As promised, we head now to Kelvin Hepner's conversation with Drew Lerner of World Weather Inc.
For Real Agriculture, I'm Kelvin Hepner. We're at Crop Connect 2024 in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and pleased to be joined now by Drew Lerner of World Weather Inc. And Drew, of course, lots of questions about what spring is going to bring here in Western Canada. Large areas of the prairies are, of course, dry. A lot of that you talked about today depends on the El Nino, La Nina transition that is underway right now.
That's right. El Nino is on its way out. It should go away fairly quickly. That's going to open the door for a little bit of moisture this spring. Not a lot, because the 18-year cycle is not going to promote a lot of moisture. It's not going to support it, but there will be opportunities for more moisture. We've already seen a little bit of this, and as we go forward now, we'll probably see a little bit more of it. The issue is whether or not La Nina will kick in and do so quickly enough to change our weather patterns. And in the past, when we've moved from an El Nino to a La Nina in a short period of time, the impact on the prairies is usually fairly significant with rains widespread. That would be, in this case, later in this growing season. But if we transition slowly, we'll still have some benefit from the moisture, but just may not be quite as abundant. But either way, the combination of losing El Nino and maybe going into a La Nina can be helpful to us.
Okay. You mentioned the 18-year cycle as well. That's another pattern that you're looking at, and that would bring us back to 2005, 2006. We won't talk about the 18-year period. What would be 18 years before that, though?
Yeah, that's right. That was 1988 that you're hedging on. Yeah, it is one of the 18-year cycle year members. But what's interesting is that all of these 18-year cycle years all seem to have a little bit of a drier bias in the middle of North America for the summer, for sure, and in the spring for the U.S., as far as the plains in the western Midwest. It's a very interesting anomaly that shows up there, and kind of interesting also down in the States that if we do have a La Nina, that La Nina will help to enhance the drier and warmer scenario that's already in the 18-year cycle down there. But for the prairies, it's a different story. We've got an environment here that will bring us kind of a mix of weather this spring. We are not going to fix Alberta, southern Alberta, with any weather event this spring. We'll have, don't get me wrong, we're going to see some opportunities for moisture, but we're not going to take care of that long-term moisture deficit, and we're still going to have low water supply there for the irrigation, and so that's going to be an issue. But as we go forward into the summer, the environment should become a little bit more favorable for a greater amount of moisture to come into play for southern Alberta. I think at the moment it looks like northern Alberta is probably more favored for an abundantly moist summer over that of the south, but it's still early in the game, so we'll see what happens. But I do think that improvement is in store for just about everybody.
Okay, improvement, but not maybe, like you said, fully restoring our moisture deficit.
Absolutely not. Not out in the southwestern parts of the region. Palliser's Triangle will still have some challenges this spring. I fully expect us to have some timeliness rain. We had a little bit of that last spring, but the rains were so erratic, and there was so much warmth there too that we just fell behind the eight ball and never got out of it. I don't think we'll have that kind of warmth this spring, but I do think the rains will be erratic. It will be greater volume of moisture than what we saw last year, but still, hit and miss type, and still leaving us crying for more. But I do think we'll be able to get into the fields, but it's going to be another one of those years trying patience for the Palliser's Triangle area.
Okay. I think I saw a local meteorologist say this is the 25th day where we've had at least 5 degrees above normal temperature here in this part of the world. What's your explanation for this abnormally warm winter that we've seen in much of North America?
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with El Nino. El Nino was a moderately strong event. If you go back in history and look at all the El Nino events in the past, they've always been warmer biased in the western part of the nation. So that was primary. But in addition to that, some of these temperatures have been even farther above normal than what you would even expect with an El Nino. Some of that came from the 18-year cycle, and some of that may be kind of influenced from what happened from the volcano that erupted in 2022, where there was moisture put into the stratosphere, and that's preventing the Earth from cooling down as much as it would normally.
So that volcano is still affecting global weather patterns right now?
I believe it is, but we don't have a lot of data to make comparisons with. This volcano in 2022, 2 years ago, was the biggest volcanic eruption in modern times, and there was even bigger than Krakatoa, but it was a non-populated area. But the point of this is that we did take atmospheric measurements from this volcano, but we have no other volcano that was even comes close to comparing it to, and let alone have any data for it. So we really don't know. And I can sit here and make up all kinds of stuff, and you can't tell me I'm wrong. So,
yeah. What was it? The moisture vapor was it 36 miles into the atmosphere?
Yeah, when this volcano erupted, it did shoot a water vapor and particulate matter 36 miles up into the atmosphere, and added 10% moisture to the stratosphere where it's normally very dry. And that moisture up there has set the stage for keeping the heat from escaping from where we live in the troposphere.
All right. Well, good to see you in person again, Drew. Thanks for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. Have a great day.
Well, it's not all bad, I suppose, as Drew Lerner says. Erratic rain, maybe not ideal, but looks like a somewhat improved picture for some parts of Saskatchewan and the greater prairies overall. So we'll have to see if that comes about. Here we are, middle of February, and certainly seeding time will be here before we know it. And definitely, I know that so many of you need that decent moisture. I heard someone say this past week, snowfall doesn't really matter anymore. It's all about springtime moisture and, of course, in season. And I found that really interesting. And partially, is that because we've got so little snowfall in some areas, or is it because we're just so far behind on the soil moisture recharge? Snow just disappears once it warms up. Really interesting scenario there. Would love to hear your thoughts on how you consider snowfall accumulation into the soil moisture picture for seeding. As always, of course, you can send us that feedback via 855-776-6147. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and I'll be back. As promised, I'm going to bring the discussion with Murad, Al-Katib, and Sean Haney at Canada's Ag Day from earlier this week, right after this.
Get all the information you need to keep your pulse crop healthy and profitable with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School is a free YouTube video series covering agronomy, research, and more across a host of different pulse crops. It's also available as an audio podcast wherever you download or stream your favorite podcast. Check us out on YouTube or visit RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School, brought to you by BSF Canada.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is your one-stop shop for everything a canola grower needs. Check out our free video series on YouTube for all the latest in canola agronomy, research, marketing, and more. Don't have time to watch? Download the podcast version of the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com or anywhere you download your podcasts. Stay on top of all things canola with the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Whether you're seeding, harvesting, or anything in between, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has you covered. Timely agronomic information from industry experts available online anytime. Give your wheat crop a good start and a great finish with the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by C&M Seeds, Syngenta Canada, and the Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission.
Welcome back to RealAg on the Weekend here on CJME 980 and CKOM 650. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and this segment is brought to you by new Oxbow cereal broadleaf herbicide from New Farm. Oxbow is powered by Duplisan technology that is a workhorse on resistant kochia and other tough weeds in wheat and barley. All right, as promised, joining me now on the show is Murad Al-Katib. He's, of course, president and CEO of AGT Foods and Ingredients in Regina. He also spoke at Canada's Ag Day. Sean Haney sat down with him to talk about what his message was and what is Canada's role to the world.
Canada's importance is actually growing. And, when we turn around and talk about that affordability and the food inflation and the price of food is high on the minds of every foreign government in the world. And I think that, we recognize that the lack of arable land and water is the two scarcest resources in the world, and Canada has an abundance of those resources. And, as world economies grow and our economy is not growing as fast, we need something to make sure we're very relevant. And food and agriculture is really that key weapon, that Canada has. So we're a societal solution, to that food insecurity. And we certainly have a more reliable production system than almost any other jurisdiction in the world. We're getting colder as it's getting to harvest. We're not getting hotter. And that gives a lot more tolerance to drought and a lot more reliability on crop. And I think that's kind of a high level importance, is that land and water availability.
So this is how we see ourselves, right? You just said it, and I've heard it from others that, Canada has this massive opportunity to play this big role. As you talk to customers, people around the world, do they see Canada that way, or is there a gap?
Well, definitely they're seeing Canada that way. I mean, again, I had a very proud moment a couple of months ago, Some of the very first trucks that rolled through the humanitarian corridor to Gaza were AGT trucks, taking, Canadian products to the Palestinian refugees. When I look at our refugee relief programs, government procurement programs, Algeria, Iraq, Kuwait, Egypt, the governments of the world are looking at Canada as a reliable source. It's a direct source, direct to the farm. It's a reliable source year after year after year as they fight food inflation, as they go to subsidized distribution of basic commodities to stabilize, their growing in food insecurity. These are, again, part of the world looking at Canada as that societal solution. And, we've taken a view that a Canadian company, that AGT has become, we have to have global supply chains. We have to be linked. We have to have, freight options out of Canada, both in container and in vessel. We have to have warehouses, processing facilities, repacking facilities in key jurisdictions like Turkey that is close to the refugees and close to the, conflicts that we're seeing around the world. So Canadian connectivity to global value chains is a big part of that societal solution. And, again, that's something that we're trying to play a role in and something that, you see a number of other Canadian companies playing into today.
One of the things that does concern me is, and it's not in all countries that we're dealing with, but there is somewhat of a more political flair to talk about being protectionist. And as a company or as a country like Canada that is very, very export reliant from a GDP perspective, and you've talked about the opportunities in front of us, how big of a threat is protectionism to Canada's ability to deliver on this, seizing the moment in terms of fulfilling some of the opportunities with global food security?
I think we have to recognize one thing. Agriculture is the most political business in the world, in that governments all over the world have an obligation to protect their farmers. And so, domestic agricultural policy is always clashing in many cases with food insecurity and food inflation. So, imagine you're a foreign government wanting to keep prices high to benefit your rural economy where a lot of the votes are in a lot of these countries. And at the same time, you're fighting food inflation. So that's, kind of the clash of policy that we end up, facing. And I think that, the key for Canada is to have a diversified set of markets. We can't be so reliant only on China and India, as major markets for our agricultural commodities. We have to have a basket so that if one large country pulls out, we have to have another way to access that market. Let's look at the canola crisis in China. Anyone who thinks that a lot less canola went into China during the canola crisis from Canada isn't looking at the trade flows. Our trade went to the roof in the UAE, and our canola was going there, and canola oil from the UAE was going to China. Okay, so, again, global value chains insulate us against the geopolitical and policy changes that we see. Look at the India policy. This year, first year, peas were reallowed for import from January to March. Why? They need the product. So we're going to see kind of a hybrid policy. We're going to see, I think, more markets reacting like Turkey, where they restrict imports from May until September every year at the time of their crop. And so they do that to protect their domestic ag. Their prices are high during those periods. And then they allow import to regulate prices for food security and food inflation. So we're going to see kind of hybrid policies that are going to be balancing those two policy objectives. But the key is, Sean, we can't put all our eggs in one or two baskets, because then those governments have too much impact on our agriculture.
Yeah, well put. Now, I know that, it's no secret, Murad, you're a very influential person in all of this space in the Canadian market, and people listen to what you're saying. Let's just say the Prime Minister invites you into a cabinet meeting and says, okay, Murad, we hear you. Great opportunity in front of us. What do we need to do as a country? What are you telling them?
Well, I guess I'm fortunate. I've had the opportunity to sit with the Prime Minister recently and talk about the opportunity in agriculture. And, I think that, there's a strong recognition across all party lines, which I think is the best part of where agriculture sits today. Whether you're a liberal or you're a conservative, today there's a recognition that agriculture is a sector that is delivering immediate economic growth and opportunity for Canada. You know, when I chaired the National Strategy Table for Agriculture and Food, we set the target to take exports from 45 billion to 85 billion by 2023. The sector met the target in 2021, 2 years ahead of our target. And when we said 85 billion, it was a very lofty target is what people thought. So, you know, how many sectors of our economy can deliver 40 billion of new economic output in a short 3-year period? So there's a recognition that it's about jobs and economic opportunity. The second thing is that as we look at the new green, clean economy, agriculture is a major polluter. Okay, so don't get worried because I'm in agriculture. We're also society's solution to climate change. We're one of the major solutions. So when we take digital agriculture and we put it over top of, you know, smart fertilization, zero minimum tillage, and data-based precision farming, the carbon intensity of agriculture in Canada, with the scale of our agriculture, has a massive opportunity to decline. So we are, you know, in a position where not only are we a societal solution to food security, we're also a societal model for climate change and sustainability. And I think that's going to bode well. And that's, you know, what I would tell the Prime Minister. And I actually say, if I was Prime Minister for a day, I would invest $100 billion over the next 3 or 4 years to improve the trade infrastructure of Canada. Yeah. Because we have to move goods to market. And when we look at, you know, the Western Canadian economy, agriculture, critical minerals, and the energy sector are major drivers of the, you know, overall economic well-being of all Canadians, not just those of us in Western Canada.
Yeah, you can have customers around the world, but if you can't get the product to them when they want it in time, then you've got a major gap.
Absolutely. I mean, this is all about reliability. It's all about all the things that we need. So, you know, trade infrastructure is something that, you know, I think government has made some small steps in, but, you know, again, we need to do more.
And we know there's an opportunity here. I think, too, we also need to make sure we're fighting complacency. Like, because there's a trap here where we're like, we're awesome. We've got, you know, we're the breadbasket. You know, we've got all this opportunity in front of us. We need to fight complacency and continue to charge ahead to make sure that we do seize this, right?
Yeah, I think that there's, you know, here's where I think we've got a strong defense there is that our farmers have proven time and time again, Sean, that they are early adopters of technology. And so, you know, again, as long as that innovation pipeline continues to move along, you know, farmers are showing how quickly they can commercialize. I mean, we've taken 2 kilograms of seed and turned it into 200,000 acres of a new pulse, as an example. Like, again, you can't do that in other countries. So, you know, again, that's where I have an optimism that complacency won't come because of work ethic and because of that early adopter of technology mindset. And the family farm today is changing. I mean, the scale continues to grow. And, you know, again, I haven't seen so many young faces, you know, MBAs, college educated, and, you know, very, very intelligent business people running Canadian farm family businesses today. That's going to help us.
Well put.
All right, let's leave it there. We're going to hop to a break, and I'll be back with our last segment of RealAg on the weekend here on CJME 980 and CKOM 650 right after this. I'm Lyndsey Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomists, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomists with me, Lyndsey Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by Pride Seeds, BASF, and Syngenta Canada.
Welcome back to Real Ag on the weekend here on CJME 980 and CKOM 650. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and for this last segment, we go to my conversation that I had with John Barlow. He's the MP for Foothills, Alberta. He's also the ag critic for the Conservative Party of Canada. And I caught up with him to ask about the status of Bill C-234 and also where he sees Canada going in agriculture and where he sees this Liberal government going wrong.
You know, they've asked me to focus on Canada's role, agriculture, when it comes to global trade. I think that's a very important topic right now, as we see agriculture as a very important tool for us to rebuild Canada's respect globally, but also certainly rebuild our economy as we come out of what's going to be a very difficult financial time. But I think the most important message of that is there is incredible opportunities for agriculture to have an important role. But unfortunately, our current government, I think, is taking us down the wrong path for our ability to meet that potential. So I think this is a critical crossroads where a government has to make a decision. Are we going to follow that European model of activism, ideology, and not making science-based decisions, or are we going to pick the path where we're basing our decisions on innovation, science, data, and what's best for Canada and what's best for our global customers?
I'll editorialize a little. It's not working great for the EU right now. Anyway, but that's my own slide. Okay, so now, but of course, Parliament is back sitting. Bill C-234 is in the works. We're not necessarily seeing a lot of action here as far as moving it forward. How do you see this playing out moving forward? Yeah, unfortunately, it's back in the Liberals' court for the most part. We are trying to get it on the table as often as we can. So we've been successful that way. We've had it up for 2 hours of debate already. But as long as the Liberals put up speakers, they can drag this out for as long as they want. So obviously our argument is, this passed the House of Commons with, very strong support of all the opposition parties. This has already gone through the Senate. Stop fighting what clearly parliamentarians, elected officials, and Canadian farmers want. But obviously they are not going to let this go. But we are not giving up the fight. We know this is an uphill battle. Even if we get it to a vote in the House and it passes, it goes back to the Senate. So the shenanigans could start all over again. Really frustrating, I know, for Canadian farmers who were so engaged in the push to get 234 across the line. But unfortunately, the Liberals are refusing on this one to put a carbon tax carve-out for farmers, despite the financial benefit that this would give farmers. But certainly for us to try and lower food prices for Canadians, ensure more farmers we have, more product, higher yield, cheaper prices. Now, there's also the option potentially of accepting the amendment and moving it forward, but that's not necessarily first choice. Is that something you could see moving on and moving it forward so that you at least get something on the table, or is it all or nothing? Yeah, I think preferably, certainly we'd rather have it in its original form without the amendments. We have had some discussions. Can we move it along if we drop the amendment on taking out heating and cooling of barns? I think we could live with the sunset clause if we had to. Obviously, our thought is we're going to be in government by that time, and we will get rid of the carbon tax entirely. But if that's what it takes, a little bit of negotiation, some compromise on our part to expedite this through the process, I think we're open to that. But certainly the feedback we've had from Canadian farmers is they want that heating and cooling of barns element as part of the bill. And really, that's half the bill. And so to eliminate that would be negating a real important aspect. But let's be honest. The only reason that amendment is in there has nothing to do with that there are other alternatives for heating and cooling of barns. This was a way for the Liberals and Liberal-appointed senators to delay and stall this bill. That's really all it is. They wanted an amendment. They didn't care what the amendment was. So this isn't about what's right and what's wrong. This is a way for them to just put wrenches in the wheels of this bill. And again, it's really unfortunate because this is an element where you've seen, as you know, Lyndsey, it's very rare for all agriculture commodity groups to come together in a united voice, but they are on this particular issue. So for the Liberal government to ignore that for an ideological argument is really, really frustrating. And with that, we've wrapped up another episode of Real Ag on the weekend. Of course, as always, you can head on over to RealAgriculture.com. You can download this as a podcast, or you can listen to past episodes and check out all our other coverage there as well. From all of us here at Real Agriculture, cheers, have a wonderful week, and Sean Haney will be back in the driver's seat next Saturday here on CKOM 650 and CJME 980. Have a great week. Cheers, everybody.